Welcome to Caring.
Welcome to Caring Well.
Welcome to Caring Well.
Welcome to Caring Well.
Caring Well. Welcome to Caring Well.
Welcome to Caring Well.
Welcome to Caring Well, a Middleton Pediatrics podcast where we have conversations to help you care well for your child. Today, Sarah and I have a conversation with David Thomas. David is a counselor in Nashville, Tennessee. He's an author of multiple books and a host of his own podcast. Our conversation centers mostly around his book, Raising Emotionally Strong Boys. David is truly an expert in his field with years of experience. You're going to love so many of the things that he shares. So let's go to that conversation. David Thomas, welcome to Caring Well.
Thank you for having me.
We are so excited about you being here. We've been excited about this conversation for quite a while, and feel like the things that you do professionally and teach are just kind of right in the wheelhouse of what we see every day. So we're going to get into a lot of that stuff. But before we do, we'd love for you to tell us just a little bit about yourself, both personally and then segue into sort of a day in the life professionally.
Be glad to. But I think first I have to say I want to be completely transparent that I've been looking so forward to this conversation with both of you. And you, Dr. Middleton, are legendary in my family.
Oh.
So I have 3 delightful nieces who I adore and only one nephew, and you are his pediatrician.
Yeah.
I've heard the most wonderful things about you for the longest time. And so
That's
to
so kind. Yeah.
meet you in person and share time, I'm thrilled.
Yeah.
Really honored just to be with the two of you. And I love the mission of what this podcast is about. So thank you for having me.
For sure.
And I am, to your kind question, the executive director of a counseling practice in Nashville called Daystar Counseling Ministries, where I have been for almost 30 years now. And we do the work a little different in that we're in a house rather than an office, which is a very intentional decision, because if any folks listening have ever taken a child you love to counseling or gone yourself, you know that first appointment can be somewhat overwhelming. So we try to do as much as we can to help kids and families feel really at home and welcomed when they walk through our doors. So our offices look like living rooms. They don't look like offices. And we have 7 therapy dogs on staff. So you are more likely to be greeted by a canine than a human when you first come in, which we think is a win. And I work with an incredible team of folks that I learn from on a daily basis. And so thankful that I've been able to work alongside great folks and learn just sitting front row to being with kids and adolescents and families for a lot of decades in doing this work. And then out of that work, I've had the privilege to get to write some books, and I co-host a podcast with a dear friend and colleague of mine called Raising Boys and Girls. And on occasion get to travel to different spots and speak, which is what brought me to your great city. And I'm thankful it led to us getting to be in conversation together.
What are some of the most common reasons that we're going to focus mostly on boys, that boys come to your office, even though I'm sure what you get to, the reasons are maybe deeper than why they came, but what are the reasons they feel like they come? What brings them to you?
We see a lot of families in transition. We see a lot of families who are navigating separation and divorce, and Nashville has become a desirable city. So we have a lot of families who transplant to our city, and just navigating that transition of uprooting your life, a familiar place, and being in a brand new place, and see a lot of what folks probably would imagine, a high percentage of boys who've been identified with ADHD, high numbers of anxiety, some depression with adolescents as well, and then a range of other things that might come to mind as you think about just different things that boys and kids would struggle with.
Yeah. Typical age range that you see?
We see kids as young as elementary school all the way through college. So I would say the biggest percentage of our kids are somewhere between 8 and 18. And then we see a few who are a little younger and some who are a little bit older.
And you individually see both boys and girls?
You know, it's interesting. In this season of my work, in my current role, I'm doing a lot more administrative work and supervising our staff. And a couple of days a week, I do some coaching with parents. But I guess I'm semi-retired from seeing kids. Now, I do a lot of assessments with families when they come for their very first appointment. So I still get great interactions with kids who are coming for a first visit.
And that parent coaching, is that often individualized or is it group?
It's individual.
Okay.
It is. And so grateful for that work. I just sit with a lot of really intentional parents who are just curious about a particular stage of development, a particular struggle they're navigating as a family. And I love having really proactive conversations with parents about how to care for kids and adolescents they love.
But what have you seen over the last couple decades in terms of things changing, different issues and different cultural winds that are affecting adolescent boys?
Higher rates, and I know this feels true for the two of you as well, just higher rates of anxiety and depression than we've ever seen.
So much higher.
Yes, and kids struggling younger and younger. I don't remember early in my work seeing near the evidence of elementary age kids who are struggling, sometimes just debilitated by anxiety in different moments. So that has been a shift. And I would say a particular concerning trend with boys and adolescent males is what I would define as avoidance of risk. And I think that shows up depending on where they are in development in really different ways. So I've never seen as many elementary age boys who are hesitant or disinterested or full-on resistant to joining a sports team or signing up for a club at their school, as many middle school boys who are resistant in some of the exact same ways, as many high school boys who are hesitant or resistant to getting their driver's license. You know, when I was growing up,
I've noticed a ton of that in
yes,
the office.
I
So
did not
surprising.
know a single adolescent who was not chomping at the bit to get to the DMV. And I'm hearing more and more parents report kids being really disinterested. And then if I were to jump up one more, pocket of development, fewer adolescent boys who are interested in pursuing college. And that's not to say college is the end all be all for every student, but I'm concerned that this avoidance of risk that starts early translates to that and a desire, which we know is common with kids and adolescents struggling with anxiety, of trying to make their world smaller and smaller and smaller. And so we talk about a working definition we talk a lot about in our practice with kids and adolescents, boys and girls, is that anxiety is an overestimation of the problem or the situation, and it's an underestimation of myself. So the situation feels too big, I feel too small, and I am concerned at how much I think that definition is fitting with a lot of those moments for kids. I feel too scared to sign up for this activity. I feel too scared to get my driver's license. I feel too scared to look at college. It all feels too overwhelming, and I feel too incapable. And
not
I'm
knowing where to go for help.
Yes.
Like, who do I ask?
Yes.
Nobody talks about this. I've never heard
yes.
parents or friends' parents talk about the struggles, where do I go?
And I'm concerned if that pattern becomes that familiar or a bit of a default setting, just all of how I think that limits kids in the world as adults and opportunities and relationships they could pursue and enjoy and experience a lot of good things around that they've developed this pattern of resisting.
Do you have theories, and maybe more than theories, as far as why those trends?
I do have some theories, and I'd really love to hear both your theories too.
Yeah.
You tell me if you agree or disagree
Yeah.
in terms of what you're seeing. I would say one theory, and this even speaks to your great question of just shifts in the work. My dear friend Sissy Goff, that I host the podcast with, my colleague, and I talk a lot about how we've experienced that a lot of corrections end up being overcorrections. And I sit with a lot of parents who would say, for example, I grew up not really feeling heard. I don't feel like my parents really knew what was going on with me, and maybe didn't seem all that interested, and swing the opposite direction of, I want to hear everything my kids are saying. I want to be so attuned, which is wonderful. I would argue, I think this generation of parents may be the most connected, the most attuned in so many ways. I think it's wonderful. But like with most things in this world, the healthy middle is where it's at. And so I think not listening enough isn't helpful. Listening for too long might not be helpful either. And so where could we land some in the middle? And so, if I think about this concept of risk, I really want kids in all stages of development to experience healthy risk, healthy opportunities. And what does it look like to push kids out and allow them to experience discomfort? And I think when the highest priority is attunement, connection with nothing else, again, those are great things, but with nothing else, it makes it really hard to step into allowing kids to experience risk, which gives way to discomfort. And I love Dr. Susan David, who wrote a great book called Emotional Agility. She says that discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. And I love those words. I think they're so true. And so if that's true, how could we be about the journey of landing in that healthy middle space of letting kids experience discomfort that is just part of being human in this world, and I think necessary to growth. And so that's a long answer to one of my theories.
Yeah.
Will you all weigh in? Because I'd be so excited to hear what you think.
That is like hits the nail on the head, just as far as, I mean, even you do a good job of telling me when I'm kind of in the middle of, okay, do I care too much? Do I need to ask the teacher about this? Do I need to, maybe it's just how things are now, but it's hard to see your kid uncomfortable or sad or not getting chosen or not excelling in a way that you thought that they might. And I've had to learn to be comfortable in those moments of that's actually healthy growth for them to be bored or left out one time. I don't have to call and fix it. I don't have to make sure that they, I don't know, get invited to everything. And that's just emotional growth for them. But I do think that's something that my generation struggles with, is that we want everything to be fixed and perfect. And that's just, we're just hindering our kids' growth.
Yeah, I mean, this may sound a little simplistic, but it does seem like the lack of free play is a huge part of it. I mean, there's so much developmental psychology that talks about those things you just mentioned. So much of that's learned in a setting of play, risk taking, but it needs to be non-parentally involved free play, and so I'm sure you're familiar with Blessing of a Skinned Knee book, and just so
good.
Formative for us as far as the way we viewed parenting. Yeah, really good. And just that there's so much, and again, like Sarah said, there's so much well-meaning parental involvement. And we've said with our families, who I would sincerely say are great families, that the mistakes are the too much. The too muches, not the too littles. Yeah.
A great way to say it.
And it's just this really well-meaning. And I think some of it is maybe even there's so much awareness.
Yes.
I mean, the one that we can all relate to so easily is the real-time awareness of your kid's grades, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the email.
Over information.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
The email comes home before the kid
Constantly
does,
yes.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just hard as a parent to not react to something you've been made aware of. And so
Absolutely.
you can take that same principle with a social interaction between your child and another child, and an egregious injustice done against your child, and you're aware of it. It's kind of hard. So anyway, I think with the free play, there's so much that parents were appropriately unaware of. So that would be some of it. But what specifically led you to writing this book?
Well, I wrote a book back in 2005 called Wild Things, The Art of Nurturing Boys. And that book was really about boy development from birth all the way through the mid-20s. And I had a chapter that was I had a section on the heart of boys and a chapter that was really about their emotional lives. But I remember finishing that chapter and thinking, I have so much more I'd like to say. But the book was already too long at that point, so it didn't make sense. And so I just kind of set that aside. And then I think, 2 more decades of doing the work and seeing these really scary statistics that kept surfacing year after year around, in particular, adolescent boys and young adult males, and even adult males. And I remember about the 20th time I had read some version of the same statistic that adult men lead the stats around: infidelity, internet pornography, substance abuse, suicide, and thinking in my mind, what else could we be doing on the front side of development to get in front of this? I think about the wisdom of those wise words, like how long are we going to watch people, I'm paraphrasing, falling in the river before we go to the front side and figure out why they're falling in the first place? And so, the common denominator in those 4 really being a male's attempt to numb out or shut down whatever he's experiencing. And so, it just got me thinking, how could I be talking more, writing more, learning more about the emotional lives of boys, and ended up in conversation with my editor and saying, do you think that could be worthy of a book? And he said, I really do. And so it was a really helpful exploration to just go back into the stories.
Is it accurate to say, I mean, they're both excellent in each different ways, is that Wild Things is more descriptive and this is more prescriptive?
I think that's a great way to say it.
Okay. What seems to be sort of foundation of the book is the 3 R's. I mean, that's this recognized. And so maybe why don't you walk us through that and why you have found that such a important and helpful guide to navigate boys' emotional journey.
Well, I really love the idea, and I think of my own journey. So my journey in parenting is that my wife and I, our firstborn is a girl, and about a year into her life, we got pregnant for the second time, and we were incredibly grateful and went for the ultrasound midway through the pregnancy. And we walked into the room and said to the tech, okay, we're really old school. We don't want to know what we're having. We didn't know my daughter was a girl till the day she was born. So make a note in our chart. Don't tell us. And I can still remember where I was standing in that room today as the tech looked up with this huge smile and said, I see 2 heads. And I remember my first thought was, why are you smiling if the baby has 2 heads? Like,
This is a good thing.
nothing about that sounded right to me. And we were that shocked. Like, we didn't have a history of multiples in our family. My wife had an almost identical pregnancy. She hadn't gained extra weight. Her counts weren't different. None of the indicators that are usually there when you're carrying multiples. And so we were shocked. And here we are midway through finding this out. And
I assume you were glad you at least found that out ahead of time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then went a step forward and said, okay, we're so behind at this point, we do need to know. And she said, 2 boys, which changed the whole game for us on so many levels. And thinking about so many of the things I had, studied for writing the book about Wild Things. And so all of that to say, those kids being born so close together on the front side, I used to laugh. I laugh now with my children as adults and say, if you were fed and changed every day, we were knocking it out of the park. Like, if you got a bath, that was just extra. And so I needed things to be as simple as possible. And I love the idea of the 3 R's being something that I was hopeful parents could remember and think about and be easy to implement and execute. So the first is recognize, which is just to notice the signs and signals our bodies give us of an emotional response. And we teach it to kids kind of like the dashboard of a car. So we'll say to kids, watch the dashboard on your mom and dad's car and notice that it's going to signal you when the tire is low or when the tank is low, or maybe a bigger signal like the check engine light. And to stay with that analogy, we all know that if I pay attention to those signs and signals, attend to the car, it keeps running. If I choose to ignore it, I'm going to end up on the side of the road. And our bodies are a lot the same. And I'm speaking to folks who know that better than anyone. And it's like, there's all kinds of truth to that age-old book, The Body Keeps the Score. And so if we carry high amounts of cortisol, the stress hormones in our bodies over time, our bodies are going to signal us. And so how do I attend to those things? That's the first R. And the second R is regulate, which is to employ calming and coping strategies when the nervous system goes into a heightened state. So with kids, we say, how do you get from stress to settled? Or how do you get from chaos to calm? And we work every day in our offices to help kids come up with a top 5 list of just healthy coping strategies that they like and work for them. And then the third R is repair, which is to take ownership and do any needed relational work. And that word needed is key, because a lot of times I may not want to do the needed work, but it's needed. And we talk about teaching kids that forgiveness is a decision, it's not a feeling. And so what does it look like for me to move into that third R when it's needed? Now, we talk a lot about how if I practice the first 2 R's long enough, I actually need the third R a little less. We all need the third R. We're all going to fumble the ball. We're going to say and do things we later regret in the context of any relationship. But if I'm working hard to practice the first 2 R's more, I actually do need the third R less. And so the hope is that we could really be about practicing all throughout growth and development, those first 2 R's that are skills all 3 of us know kids are going to be using for the rest of their lives with their spouses, with their own children, with their coworkers, with their friends and neighbors, with their own parents and siblings as adults.
What encouragement do you have for parents that may feel like they've missed the mark, or dads in particular that may feel like I'm ill-equipped, or I have never experienced this, or I never had somebody teach me this? Is it ever too late?
It is never too late. I've lost count with how many families have said that a grandfather is working on these things and talking about it with a grandson and saying, let's practice together. I love that language. Let's practice together. And I have a section in the book where I challenge parents. I call it narrate your experience and come home in the everyday. I'm not wanting to assign extra work to parents. Like, just use what's right in front of you. And in the everyday, if you attended a funeral that day, talk about that in an age appropriate way. If just, I felt a lot of sadness, and here's what helped me move through the sadness. Or I felt really frustrated with a coworker today. Here's something I tried in the break room that helped me a lot for a minute. And narrating our experience in that way, I think, gives kids permission to know this is just good human work. We all need to be doing this. It's not something you graduate from on your 18th birthday. You're just hopefully developing the skills you're going to need for the rest of your life.
Would love to maybe hang out, especially on the first two, and hear some practical ways that you help kids walk through that. Maybe spend a little bit of time on how you help kids learn to recognize.
I actually brought you a couple of copies of some children's books. We had a chance this past year to write our first children's books. And because we use these therapy dogs, the series is called the Daystar Dogs. And we're simply working off what we've seen happen in our office for decades now, which is kids are so responsive to pets, and so many families have them. And we found easier to teach some emotional and social skills through animals. And so that's where the whole idea came about. And we were so encouraged with the workbooks, which are really targeted at elementary age kids, that we started thinking, how could we even be working on these skills with kids in the preschool window? And so, back to the conversation we were sharing a few minutes ago about boys channeling everything toward anger. I have for years been doing parent coaching with parents of boys who are preschool age. And the research would tell us that boys in the preschool window are more prone to biting, hitting, kicking, throwing, screaming. And it is their way of telling us, I need a release of some kind. So the first R is really teaching boys to pay attention to when they're feeling different things in their bodies, and what are the things that I could be doing to get a healthy release. And so we talk a lot with kids of all ages about how movement and breathing are the two most efficient, effective ways that any of us can practice the second R. So if I'm paying attention with the first R and I'm practicing in that way with the second R, I love, and I walk through a blueprint of how to do this in the workbook, having families create some kind of space in their home where boys could go, girls as well, to do the work of that second R in their space, no matter how young. And a lot of preschool and elementary age classrooms practice this. They may have a calm down corner. And I work with a lot of high school teachers who have an identified space. And it's like, if you are feeling anxious before a time test, like, go to the back of the room. You sit on a medicine ball for a few minutes. They keep it a bucket of stress balls somewhere in the classroom that kids could even hold in their non-dominant hand while writing still. And I love the thought of us introducing or reinforcing these ideas with kids, even in educational spaces. So in my perfect world, there would be a feelings chart hanging up in every classroom, and every family might have one on a fridge or on a table somewhere where it's a good visual reminder of the importance of just folding in more emotional vocabulary. Because I read years ago, and here I am sitting with a pediatrician, so you can confirm if I'm right or wrong in this, that pediatricians reported at 18-month well visits that girls on average had about 100 words and boys had about 30. And it got me thinking, okay, if she has 3 times the words he does in terms of general vocabulary, it would make sense that her emotional vocabulary, as you were talking about your oldest daughter, would likely be more expansive. And so we're going to have to labor a little longer, in my experience with boys throughout, to really expand his emotional vocabulary. And I think the feelings chart is just a good, easy tool. We put one in the back of one of the dog books so that kids even that young, before they could even read, could just be pointing to an expression and parents naming that feeling. So we're laying that foundation there, and then
which we do with body parts and colors,
yes,
and other things. Why not emotions, right?
Why not? So that it is simply that familiar.
one of the things you talk about, which I want to hear you share about too, I know I'm going a bunch of different directions, but basically this definition of masculinity. What would you say are some of the problematic messages of masculinity that boys are getting, and then maybe offer us a better definition?
If I were to think about one of the most common phrases in that space, the, classic phrase of man up, which I think every male in this world has heard at some point, if not 100 times. And I challenge parents to really think about the messaging behind those words, because most times, I'm not assuming all times, but most times, I think there is some part of that is a message of stop feeling. We suck it up, move forward.
Move on.
And
Probably even because when it's being said, it's maybe being said in response when someone's being overly
I
emotional.
Yeah.
I agree.
Interesting.
I agree. And so I think dissecting messages like that I think boys are bombarded with throughout their growth and development is where it starts in terms of understanding the current definition of masculinity, which I think leans hard into that. And I talk in the book about how I think boys intuitively swing in several directions. One, in terms of their emotional development, between suppression, which is holding it in, or eruption, which is exploding, neither of which is helpful. And the healthy middle ground is expression. How can I name and navigate my experience, which is what the first two R's are all about. And so if that message of man up, I think in some ways is all about suppression, do more of that. I think boys absorb that and think that's the target I should be moving toward, feeling less, shoving it down when I do start to feel something showing up inside of me. And so I think it's dissecting those messages. And I would argue, I certainly want to say, I think we've come a long ways in broadening our definition of masculinity in some good and helpful ways. But I think we still have a ways to go in that space. And I would say, I think a healthier definition is a male who can name and navigate his experience.
All right. So going back, so I don't get off track, regulate. So you said breathing, physical activity. Some of your best suggestions, tips for maybe even different ages. And you talked about having designated spaces, but even more specific, helping with breathing techniques and helping with physical activity.
I think even introducing the idea of breathing to a lot of boys, certainly to a lot of adolescent males, is not all that inviting. And so we laugh, my male colleagues and I in our practice laugh about how we've really got to dress up breathing to get boys of all ages to buy in. And so we call it combat breathing. And it's actually a name that I learned from some consulting work that I did with Army Rangers and Navy SEALs, and is a required skill set for them. And in the workbook, I do a little Brain 101 with boys to just talk about what happens in our brain and bodies when we become emotionally charged, and how blood flow shifts from the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala. I'm preaching to the choir here. And how we've got to figure out how to move that blood flow back to the front. We want to get our thinking brain on board with our emotional brain. And breathing, research would tell us at least 20 seconds of deep breathing would begin to reset the amygdala. And that's pretty remarkable to think about. Only 20 seconds. And if I double that to 40, twice the benefit, triple it to 60, just 1 minute of deep breathing, I can start to do a lot. Again, stress to settled, in terms of that journey of stress to settled, the early work of that. So I always talk with boys about Army Rangers and Navy SEALs because I think it gets their attention. And then I say, okay, if that's true for them because they want their thinking brain on board, these are individuals who are in life or death situations. They have to be able to think rationally. That's our guarantee that it works. And then I wear the Apple Watch, and I have my heart rate on my front screen, and I will have boys look at it because I love giving them the actual data of the communication. I'll say, do you think my heart rate's going to go up or down? And they will study the number. We'll do it together for a minute, and I can always lower at least a point or two. And so it's the evidence there of
you
it can
are
happen.
more in control than you think.
Absolutely.
That's right.
And that, I love that you said that, because I think that's key. Because what happens for so many boys when they become emotionally charged is they start to feel out of control. And this belief that I could be doing something that simple that it would allow me to feel more in control of my emotions than my emotions being in control of me is where I do get a lot of buy-in. And that's where we also talk about movement, because I've had a lot of boys report to me, and I love when they do because it's so truthful. Okay, I tried breathing, but it didn't work, or it didn't accomplish all that I wanted to. And I'll say, back to what we talked about with preschoolers, research has long said we as males have a lot of physicality to our emotions. And so we often need a movement-based release first and then try some breathing second. I had a 7-year-old boy say to me one time, moving is like baking a cake and breathing is like icing the cake. And I was like, what a great way of saying that. And he's like, you can't ice the cake before you bake the cake. And he said, I almost always have to run in my driveway up and down the stairs for a few minutes to get some of that intensity out. And then if I sit and do the breathing, then I get into a more settled space.
You mentioned in your book about this transition from co-regulation to regulation. So
Yes.
maybe unpack that for parents, because that's such a good thing that it seems like you can see the whiffs of not co-regulating early and then the whiff of continuing to co-regulate when it should be. So anyway, help us understand that, help parents understand that.
I would argue, I think traveling that journey with the kids we love from co-regulation to self-regulation is maybe harder for parents than in any other time. Because I think there's something about moving them toward the skill development of self-regulation that doesn't align for a lot of parents with everything they believe to be true about attunement and connection. I had a dear friend who's a child psychologist say to me not long ago, she's been practicing for 3 decades. She said, I don't ever remember being asked in the first 20 years of my work if it was a bad idea to send kids to preschool. But I get asked that a lot now. And the question is usually, am I interrupting attachment if I send kids to preschool? This idea that if I send kids away and they're struggling in the separating out, which we all know is a part of secure attachment, then am I doing something damaging? And I think it speaks to a new trend of us believing that that could be true. And then if my kids are in any way experiencing discomfort and distress and leaving me to go be with other safe adults, then I'm interrupting something I've worked so hard to build. And I think the same mindset could transfer over to this space of if they're struggling and I'm not right with them at all times. And the way I teach it with parents, or the way I invite parents to think about it, is like bike riding. Like I say, think about how long the journey of teaching a kid to ride a bike independently. That's a long journey.
Right.
We're going to start with a tricycle. We're going to move to a bike with training wheels. We're going to eventually take the training wheels off. And even when we do, we're going to be running along beside them, holding the handlebars in the beginning, because no kid can get that wobbling, pedaling, combined movement down. And then eventually we'll be running beside them with our hand on their back. And then eventually we want them to be riding successfully in the cul-de-sac safely. And then eventually we're inside the house returning emails and they're riding safely in the neighborhood. Now that's not a 2-day event or even necessarily a 2-year event, but it's this long journey of skill development and practice, because we all want the kids we love to be able to ride a bike successfully.
But what does good co-regulation look like at young ages? So you have a child who isn't able to regulate. What would you love? Paint a picture for us of what healthy co-regulation, what the parent is doing beside that child.
I think it always starts with empathy, whatever age the child or adolescent. I think anytime we lead with empathy, we're knocking it out of the park. I can tell you're having a hard time. I can tell you're frustrated. I can tell you're upset that I said it's time to turn off the iPad, or we have to finish this fun thing we're doing right now and head toward bath time. Whatever it may be, we're leading with empathy and acknowledging kids are struggling, which I think also helps us move toward that healthy middle ground of expression. So stop crying. You'll get to play this again tomorrow night. Why are you so upset? Whatever, but leading with empathy. And then I love moving toward a question, which I think invites the independence of what would help right now? Because I think that question also assumes what I believe to be true, which is kids have inside of them the abilities to do this. Like back to breathing. Like I have this built-in ability to do something as simple as breathing to get myself from chaos to calm. So I have these skills, but I have to, back to bike riding, I have to practice these skills. And in our experience, and I would love to know both your thoughts on this, okay? in our experience, my colleagues and I talk a lot about this. We have seen this pattern over time that often the brighter the kid, the more they resist developing resourcefulness and practicing regulation. I think those kids we find often are often highly skilled in manipulation and negotiation, and they would prefer to just fall back on, let me bait you into some emotional tug of war. So maybe you'll either A, give in, B, I could wear you down and then you won't require something of me. Like, I just think they're so skilled in those spaces that they often resist more and longer because they have some intuitive, strong cognitive muscles that help them do that.
And just the fear of failure. I feel like those kids have one or maybe two at home. They're used to doing things well. And this may be an area that they don't feel like they can do that well. They don't have those resources yet. And so it's like, I don't want to try and then mess up or fail or disappoint you. And so I'd rather you just do it for me, you know?
It is.
And almost like the way they've gotten advanced in life is controlling things.
Totally.
That is
yeah.
it.
I want to go back to something you said at the very beginning, because I thought it was such a great way to see anxiety and maybe other things too, is an overestimation of the external and the underestimation of your internal ability to handle that. Why so much now? And really thinking in terms of those things, is it more one or the other? I know it's both, but is there too much awareness of external things going on? Or this gets back to the trend line discussion, because the anxiety uptick, that doesn't even give it enough gravity, right? I mean, it's more than an uptick. And so anyway, I guess, how do you think about each of those dynamics? And then sounds like most of the way you address it is addressing a more proper equipping and estimation of the internal. But is there some addressing of kind of, let's get clear-eyed about the externals?
I feel pretty convinced, I could be wrong, but I feel pretty convinced that the numbers 50 years ago were higher, and we just didn't understand it in the way we do now. I mean, we didn't have a name for it in the way we do now. And so I don't think it's just that there was barely any anxiety then and crazy amounts of it now. You know, I have laughed with parents when I, ask about family history when they're talking about a kid they're concerned about. And, I've lost count with how many parents have said, my dad or my grandfather was not diagnosed with anxiety, but he drank a lot, and it's like, yes, a lot of people did for a long time. And I think they were medicating anxiety and depression, but we didn't understand it in the way we do now. So I think, and I sit with a lot of parents who would say, I absolutely had it, and no one really understood it or was aware or told me, why are you being so irrational? And so I'm convinced the numbers were higher, but I would argue, to your great question now, I think every arena where kids and adolescents exist, there has been a significant acceleration of some kind. I think about the classic phrase of kindergarten is the new first grade. Well, it turns out that is true. Like, at one point in time, we did kindergarten 3 days a week, or we did half day kindergarten. And so we're now inviting kids in 5, 6 to do a first grade experience as we did it at one point in time. And my kids as 8th graders took classes I took in high school, as juniors and seniors took classes I took in college. And then I think about the athletic experience. And when I was in high school, I knew plenty of kids who played 3 and 4 sports a year. And that's, I almost never hear of that anymore. And so there is an acceleration. There's been an acceleration athletically, academically. I even laugh about when I went to college, I went to the University of Tennessee. And at that time in the 80s, you needed a pulse and a checkbook to get in. That was the requirement. And nowadays it's like kids need to have an insane ACT score and have launched a nonprofit by their senior year. And so I don't love the acceleration that I do think creates more external pressure that I think adolescents are absorbing right and left. But I would argue kids are, as that's why I think we're seeing kids younger and younger who are struggling. So I'm very interested in how we could dial down the pressure in those places. And then we haven't even touched the animal of technology.
That's
that
right.
I think is a key contributor.
Are there specific ways that you ask / get kids to audit their own intake? Are there ways you coach parents? I guess what I'm desperately looking for is techniques to address it that work, as opposed to just speaking to the problem that it is.
Yes.
Because we get asked and we
All the
really
time.
want to, but honestly feel a little bit ill-equipped or not even know where to go with it.
I'm incredibly grateful for Jonathan Haidt's work in The Anxious Generation. And I do recommend every parent read that book, because I think it's access to maybe some of the best, newest data and a clear blueprint, whether you would take that path or not, to at least consider, okay, would it be possible that I could wait longer before introducing a device, or hold off with social media until this point in development, and even be thinking uniquely about my kids? Like I think about, he's done an outstanding job in helping us think wisely about, why have we seen this insane rise in anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation that we once did not see with adolescent girls in the ways we are? And so, and I don't think it's fair to point the finger only at social media, but we would be foolish not to acknowledge the role that's playing in those places, and inviting a comparison that's always been there for adolescent girls, but an invitation to go deeper into that than ever before. So I do appreciate the wisdom within the recommendations, whether families would consider that or not. I think it's a good read just to be informed. And I think, to your question as well, I'm always quick to say to parents, I wish there were an exact prescriptive one size fits all, but I do think it's different with all kids. Like, I think we were laughing about firstborn girls a little bit earlier. I have one as well. And, a lot of, not all, firstborn girls have some really strong self-governing tendencies where I didn't have to police things with my daughter in that way, that she had a lot of discernment and wisdom. She struggled in her own ways, as all kids do, but it is to say, I think certain kids have a stronger awareness of, I can see how this has affected me, or a discernment. I can remember the first time we had a conversation with my daughter in high school, and she was like, I just today thought about the fact that the couple of girls who are struggling the most in my grade with body image and disordered eating are probably the girls that spend the most time on social media, that making these really good connections. And so I think always wanting to invite kids deeper into critical thinking so that they can begin to set parameters for themselves when we're not around. And then other kids who struggle more or struggle longer, and we have to set better parameters for them until they get to a place where they can set those for themselves.
I think one of the things that I see the most too is the vocabulary of teens that have shifted. And I'm sure you see this in the office too all the time, that it goes from, it's no longer I'm sad, and you talk about this in your
Yes.
book, but I'm depressed.
Hmm.
I'm worried. I'm worried about this one thing, but I have anxiety.
Yes.
And can you speak to a little bit about that? Just how did we get there, and how did we get to such an uncomfortable place of just being able to sit with, I feel really worried about this one
Yeah.
thing. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to spiral into all these others.
More diagnostic.
Yeah.
Discomfort is the price of admission. We're all going to feel it. We're going to experience it. And there's healthy stress that is part of how we grow. And that's not necessarily anxiety, and understanding the difference. And, I am always wanting to challenge adults that I think we've contributed to the problem. I think we even jokingly, sometimes I hear, adults say things like, had kind of a PTSD morning, or had a little OCD last night. And we're overusing a lot of things in ways that I don't think helps. That over labeling is something I think we're doing a lot of that isn't helping the kids we love. And it's right back to the feelings chart. I think if we're using that with a lot of consistency, there's a better chance. It's not a guarantee, but a better chance kids are going to attach accurately and be using the word worry a lot, which is a human experience. We all worry about things to different degrees.
Do you feel like there has been an over medicalization of these things that may be being perpetuated a little bit by the medical community?
Let me fold myself into that category. I think there potentially has been a temptation for all of us to overdiagnose in different places. And also it's important that we acknowledge we are seeing greater evidence of struggle. But, we could have an entire day's worth of conversation about understanding the rise in ADHD and how much of it has to do with we do school really different now. And there's so much less play and so much more sitting still and maintaining focus. And also a higher percentage of kids who are struggling with attention and focus that does meet the true criteria. So I think there's not one answer. There's not one place to point our finger. But I do wonder, as we're thinking intentionally together as adults who care about children, if it's important that we look at all the possibilities and where. I just want to give a shout out again to the two of you all. I love what you're doing. I wish there was more of this kind of conversation happening. I love when you told the story of the origin of this podcast, and it just started with, we're going to gather parents on Thursday nights and talk about caring well for kids and adolescents, and that we were thinking about how could we be doing that with the kids we love in really thoughtful ways. So
I want you to do a little exercise, almost like you were in our office and in a room, and Sarah or I are seeing, we'll just pick like parents of a toddler boy, parents of a kindergarten, elementary, middle school, adolescent. What would be maybe one thing or one habit, one message, just one thing you would love to contribute to that visit, and pick whatever ages you want, but sort of trying to cover the gamut of what we see in our office?
One easy way, and this would be across development, both genders, that we love talking about skill development in the ways we've been talking about it today. And I don't know if you all have read much or listened to much of Dr. Lisa D'Amour's work. I love Lisa's work, and we spoke at an event with her in Colorado this summer, and I'd heard her talk about this before, and I love the simple way she talks about it. We do a lot in our practice, that healthy coping is about two things. It's about it brings relief and it does no harm. And I love the simplification of thinking about what could feel really complicated and elaborate in that way. So there's your checklist when you think about trying things that could be helpful to get from stress to settled. So, we'll talk a lot with kids like, all right, it's important to note that if you yell at your brother, it might bring some relief for a moment, but it does harm to the relationship. And with adolescents, giving them, I think it's important to acknowledge, like, drinking or smoking will bring some relief for a moment and also does a lot of damage to the developing brain. And so how do I think about something that checks both boxes and really work with that list consistently? And so we can do a preschool version of that, an elementary, a middle school, a high school version, but we talk a lot with kids about having a top 5 list of healthy coping and upgrading that the same way we upgrade kids' rooms. It's like, you may have had rockets on your walls when you were 4 and you didn't want that in the same way at 14. How could I be upgrading my top 5 list all throughout to make sure I check both boxes and know those things and practice those things? That's the key. A lot of kids are really good at knowing their list. They even know where it's hanging up in their house. But if we ask, like, how often are you practicing? And we will even talk with late elementary, middle school, and high school kids about, the common concept with a lot of coaches of coming back and watching footage and what we can learn from observing ourselves. And we'll say, let's ask your parents for some feedback, because inside of you, you may have felt like you were practicing breathing for a consistent amount of time, and your mom noticed it was for about 4 seconds and threw in the towel. And guarantee breathing won't help if you do it for 4 seconds. But if we get to 20 to 40 to 60 seconds, we can start to see some change there. So that to me could be a great starting point for parents of kids, whatever age. And when I challenge families to introduce this practice, I always say to parents, you make your own top 5 list too, and hang it up on a bathroom mirror so that your kids get to see I'm practicing the same things. Now, parents listening, I will warn you that I have had a lot of kids and adolescents, maybe wrongly so in some moments, maybe rightly so in others, say to their parents, Mom, you need to check your list too. Or have you tried anything on your list? And sometimes we need that sobering reminder.
Yeah, we used to, with one of ours teenage boys, we would say, in the middle of any conversation, you are always allowed to call a timeout.
It's great.
It doesn't mean the conversation won't happen.
Yes.
But anyway, when you'd be right in the middle of making a good point, and they'd like, okay, I just need to, okay, but I'm going to think. It's like, no. You said I got a timeout. But
That's so good.
yeah, but that is just knowing that the conversation is not going in a good direction. And you even, I thought one of the greatest things I loved about, it was a pretty subtle point, but just obviously I think you said, as we become parents of teenagers, our voice becomes quieter, and the temptation is to try to make it louder and talk more.
Yes.
Almost this, I can't handle the realization that it's getting quieter in your world. And so I'm going to compensate with more yelling or more talking.
Yes.
And so that's almost like an inability to transition to a different stage of parenting.
It's fascinating as we all three talk about our own experience in parenting aligned with the work that we do. And I had been talking about the importance of other voices for as long as I'd been doing this work. And as my own kids became adolescents, was my real opportunity to test drive all of that. And my wife and I developed a cue with each other that when we were talking too long, saying too much, talking louder, talking more, we would grab the other person's hand, not correct them out loud, but just like, so we laugh about if our kids would in their adulthood say like, Mom and Dad held hands a lot when we were in middle school. And it was that
all the time.
reminder. It's like, if I squeeze your hand,
Yeah.
let's pay close attention to that. And there's a lot of heightened emotions when you're parenting adolescents.
Yeah, we're co-regulating each other.
Indeed. And so the practice was there for us. But I think the temptation to everything you're saying is so strong in those moments. And I think sometimes that can come from our own fear of, I only have this much time left. I don't love the movement in our world. I don't want to be judgmental of anyone who does this at all, but the whole like dropping a marble in a jar and when it's full, like I don't love the panic that I think that can sometimes drive for parents. I've only got so much time left, which I think invites more of the, I need to say more because I got to get it all in.
What about schools? What do you think that our schools today can do practically to help support emotional growth of the boys in those schools and girls as well? But
I feel as encouraged as any other time in my work to your question of how intentional I'm finding many schools, not all, but many schools are being. I don't remember a time in history when we've been as committed to social emotional learning in our academic spaces. And I hear stories about it all the time from kids and adolescents and parents. And I'm deeply encouraged that we have finally connected some dots in knowing if we teach these, I hate the language of soft skills, but if we're teaching these particular skills, they have every possibility of advancing learning. If kids are more regulated, they have a greater capacity for learning. And so I love how many high school teachers will do, whatever they want to call it, a moment meditation, an opportunity for kids to do a little regulation work before engaging learning, that kids then are not only practicing these skills on the regular, but seeing and experiencing the benefit in that space that they translate over. I love how many coaches, again, are practicing some of these things in different ways that I just don't think that was happening early in the work that we were all doing. So I honestly feel really hopeful. And to my great wish that every classroom would have a chart hanging up somewhere. I am shocked by how many classrooms do and thrilled and how many are engaging, as we talked about earlier, the concept of a calm down corner, some kind of space, or how many teachers keep a bucket of stress balls and kids can hold those in the non-dominant hand.
For pediatric offices, I'm going to put you on the spot. What's one thing that you would say you need, you want, you hope that we can do better in visits with kids and families, even if in a brief time? If you could say, I wish that you guys would say this or touch on this so that it's just one more space that kids hear it, what would that be?
I'm going to applaud you is what I'm going to do, because I've never heard as many adolescents in particular report, or parents report, knowing their adolescents are having these conversations with their pediatrician in the last decade of them checking in. And I know many pediatricians are now considering it part of a well visit to do,
Our
a check-in
academy
in
has
this.
actually been great in this way.
Absolutely. And I'm grateful. And I wish it hadn't taken the mental health crisis we're seeing for us all to move farther in these directions, but I'm grateful. And that kids then grow up knowing that's a conversation I'm going to be having with my doctor all along the way. And I love that. So I would want every kid in well visits from early on to, not just hear those normal questions of how's school, those sorts of things. Are there things that you're worried about? What do you do when you worry? I just think those are great questions to be asking kids where they realize part of this amazing person who's caring for my whole health is asking me questions about my body, asking me questions about my heart as well.
So with all the talk culturally about the struggling male and so many different things, you've said it a few times, you are hopeful.
I really am hopeful. I am. And I wouldn't say that if I had not experienced a shift that I think is happening in a really good way. I did an event this summer in Colorado, and Michael Phelps spoke at the event. And, we all know Michael is the most decorated Olympic athlete in history. And I got a chance to sit in on a talk he did with tweens and teens. And he spent 20% of that time talking about his career as an Olympian and answering probably the questions he get asked everywhere. And he spent 80% of the time talking about mental health. And he just said, guys, if you don't hear me say anything else, hear me say, I would give anything to go back in time and be your age and figure out the safe adults that I should have told more to. And how it would have changed the game for me. And can I tell you what I figured out about my own worry and anxiety? I mean, it was incredible, just incredible. And thinking about how many entertainers, athletes, folks who have a big platform are speaking well. There's certainly some folks that maybe aren't speaking well in those spaces, but many who are that are aware I have a captive audience.
Sarah has some rapid fire questions she's going to do, but
I do.
Any one final message you would just love for the parents of our practice to hear?
Keep listening to this great podcast. I mean that, you all. You're doing good work in the world, and it was a joy to get to spend this time with you all. Thank you for what you're doing, because I realize this is a significant investment of time and resources in addition to the great work you're already doing in your practice. So thank you for offering this gift to the world.
That's kind.
Thanks for inviting me to be part of it.
Oh my goodness, we're so grateful. What you got, Sarah?
All right, I've got a lightning round of questions for you.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
These are going to be quick answers, 1
Which
to 2
I'm terrible
sentences
at.
each. You go over 2 sentences, I'm getting you cut off.
Cut me off.
All right. One phrase every boy needs to hear weekly.
You can do hard things.
Great.
Love it. A quality you hope every boy carries into adulthood.
Believing that he has what it takes. And I think boys are experiential learners, so that has to be experienced, not just told.
One myth about boys you would like to retire forever.
That boys have fewer feelings. Like we don't have any data to back that up. Now, to our conversation earlier, I think boys have fewer words, but I don't think they have fewer feelings. Yeah. So that's important to note.
One thing parents should do tonight at the dinner table to build connection.
Narrate their experience.
Love it. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Really good. This is a good one. If you could put one sentence on every school hallway poster for boys, what would it say?
Wow, what a great question. I love that quote, and there's confusion exactly over who gets credit for this, but I love the wisdom of these words. Be kind. Everyone around you is fighting a hard battle. I wish those words were on the hallways of every school as a reminder.
Really yep. Last one. What's one thing that you've learned from the boys that you've counseled over the years?
You all, these are incredible questions. I would say I have learned so much about bravery from a lot of boys. And we talk so much in our practice about none of us get to develop courage outside of fear. So even back to you can do hard things. I just want us to make sure we don't give fear a bad rap. It is the context for courage and bravery and growth. So that reminder feels important.
That's great. David, again, the title is Caring Well. The sort of our intention is to find others who are caring well and share that with our families. And you just embody that so much. And you actually have impacted our families, as Sarah alluded to, even before they've met you through this podcast, through your book. So I appreciate you making the effort to scale the things you've learned. But we especially appreciate you being a part of Caring Well and for caring well so long.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a joy to be with you both.